Urgent 2026. After 21 hours of negotiations in Islamabad, the U.S. delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance has walked away from the table. With Iran refusing to accept basic U.S. terms, the White House shifted immediately to a strategy of maximum physical pressure. President Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to begin blocking any and all ships trying to enter or leave Iranian ports. Under international law, a naval blockade is considered an act of war. By deploying the Navy to seal Iran's coastline, the U.S. has bypassed diplomacy to launch a direct military challenge against the regime's survival. American warships are now physically walling off the Iranian coast, targeting the primary maritime artery that sustains the global economy. The global reaction was instantaneous. Because 20% of the world's seaborne oil must pass through this single choke point, the price of crude has already surged past $100 a barrel. Shipping data now shows a paralyzed network. More than 800 vessels are currently trapped or idling at anchor, unable to risk the passage through the tightening naval net. Inside Iran, the blockade targets 90% of all maritime trade. Without the ability to offload oil, the Iranian government is sustaining a calculated loss of $435 million every single day. The United States is attempting to dismantle a nation's economy through a 21-mile gap where the U.S. Navy does not hold any sovereign rights over the water. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile gap between Qeshm Island and the Musandam Peninsula. Shipping lanes squeeze through this bottleneck in two corridors. Because territorial waters extend 12 miles offshore, these vital lanes exist entirely within Omani territory. While civilian ships have the right of transit passage, enforcing a military blockade means the U.S. Navy must conduct combat-adjacent operations inside the borders of a third-party state. This makes the success of America's massive naval mission entirely dependent on the physical space of a neutral, sovereign neighbor. The war has effectively split the geography of the strait into two competing operational corridors. Iran's IRGC controls the northern corridor, using mines and patrol boats to run a de facto extortion checkpoint that demands tolls of $2 million per tanker. To avoid Iranian interdiction, all commercial shipping has fled south, hugging the rugged coastline of the Musandam Peninsula in Omani Territorial Sea. U.S. destroyers are now operating almost exclusively in this southern corridor. Their mission is to identify Iranian-bound cargo and block it, while trying to allow neutral Chinese and European vessels to pass through the same crowded water. To prevent Iran from blockading the north, the U.S. has established its own blockade in the south, right under the view of Omani radar. Oman has maintained a position of fierce neutrality for decades, using its unique sectarian history to avoid being pulled into the rivalries that define the rest of the Gulf. Throughout this war, Iran has repeatedly struck Omani ports with missiles. Despite these attacks, the Omani government has refused to retaliate or close its embassy in Tehran. This tolerance exists for a strategic reason. Oman hosts the only trusted diplomatic backchannel currently capable of negotiating between Washington and Tehran. The U.S. blockade physically requires the consent of Oman, a nation that is currently prioritizing de-escalation and cannot be compelled into supporting a military operation. The blockade functions as an economic vice grip. It is a coercive tool intended to inflict maximum pain on the Iranian government without committing American ground troops to a traditional war. Washington is using this financial pressure to try and force Iran into making major concessions before the current, fragile ceasefire officially expires on April 22nd. Iran has countered by threatening to strike energy infrastructure and launch a complete, indiscriminate closure of the entire strait if the U.S. continues its interdictions. By seizing control of the shipping lanes, the U.S. is calling Iran's bluff and proving that the IRGC does not hold undisputed authority over the waterway. The United States has deployed the full weight of its naval power, but the entire operation remains precariously balanced. If Iran launches a strike inside the narrow Omani corridor, or if Oman revokes the U.S. right to operate in its waters, the entire blockade would collapse instantly. The military and economic might of a global superpower is currently bottlenecked by a few miles of coastal seawater. The crisis demonstrates that in modern warfare, having the most weapons is only part of the equation. True power belongs to whoever controls the geography.